Welcome back to 15-Minute Discourse, the show where we kind of like really dig deep into all these topics that are, out there. And today we're going to be tackling something, it's a bit futuristic, but also like kind of feels really urgent right now.
Yeah.
And that's the whole idea of universal basic income.
UBI.
Yeah, UBI, as a possible way to deal with all these jobs that are disappearing because of AI.
Yeah. What's really interesting is that we're not talking about some like far off sci-fi thing anymore. AI is like seriously changing the job market already, and it's only going to get faster.
That's so true. And all the research we're going through today, like, really shows that happening.
Hmm.
We've got these academic papers, reports on actual UBI experiments, and even like philosophical stuff about what work even means, in a world where AI might be doing like most of the hard stuff.
Right.
So today we really want to make sure you understand UBI,
Yeah.
what it could do, what the downsides might be, and how it might totally change society in the next few years.
I think it's really important to like connect this to what's happening right now. We're seeing AI taking on these jobs that people used to think only humans could do.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The research gives some crazy examples, like truck drivers having to compete with self-driving trucks, and even creative jobs getting disrupted.
It's wild.
Think about Netflix using algorithms to tell you what to watch, or even news companies using AI to write articles about sports and crime.
Those are some really good examples. It's not just about factory robots anymore. It's like algorithms making decisions that affect our everyday lives.
Right.
And it sounds like from what we've been reading, this is only the beginning, right?
Yeah.
There's this whole thing about AGI, this like artificial general intelligence that could take everything to a whole other level.
Exactly. AGI is basically AI that can learn and change like a human brain, not just follow some program.
Oh, wow.
So instead of just doing specific tasks, AGI could potentially handle complex stuff like thinking critically and solving problems.
Oh, so you're saying AI could be doctors, lawyers, even like podcast hosts.
It's definitely possible. And that's where this whole worry about jobs disappearing really starts to matter. If AGI can actually be as good as humans or even better in a lot of fields, what happens to the whole idea of working like we do now?
That's a pretty scary thought for a lot of people. I mean, seriously, how could AI change your job in the future? It's something everyone needs to think about no matter what they do.
Absolutely. And that's where UBI comes in. The main idea is to give everyone a regular, no strings attached payment like every adult citizen, no matter if they have a job or not.
Okay.
It's like a safety net for the future, especially if all those predictions about AI taking our jobs start coming true.
So it's not about getting rid of work completely, but more like giving everyone a basic income so they can like adjust and do well in a world where regular jobs might be hard to find. Like a cushion, right?
Exactly. The research points out that UBI could do some really good things, like reducing poverty, making the economy more stable, and even helping people start their own businesses.
Oh, that's cool.
If people know they've got that basic income coming in, they might be more willing to take chances and, go for it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's not just about the money either. Some of the studies show that UBI can make people less stressed and anxious, even improve their thinking and overall well-being. It's like having that financial safety net clears your mind for other stuff.
That makes a lot of sense. It's important to remember, though, that UBI isn't some like magic cure-all, right? It's more like a tool. And like any tool, it depends on how you use it and the situation you're in.
That's a good point.
So we're not saying UBI is the perfect answer to all our problems, but exploring how it could help us handle these crazy economic changes that AI is probably going to bring.
Exactly.
Kind of like a life raft in a sea of change.
Yeah, and that's why this whole discussion is so important. We're not just talking about some theory. We're talking about how to build a future that works for everyone, not just the robots.
Right.
And that's something we should all be a part of.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've talked about why UBI might be necessary, like in a future where AI is changing everything. But how do we even begin to understand something this big? I mean, it's one thing to talk about it, but has anyone actually like tried this out in the real world?
Yeah, that's what's so cool about all this research. It doesn't just get stuck in the ideas. It takes us around the world looking at actual UBI experiments. It's like we're peeking into these different possible futures to see how this idea works out in different places.
Yeah, I know those examples are really interesting. It's one thing to say, oh yeah, UBI could work, but it's totally different to see it in action.
Right.
It's like those social experiments you see in documentaries, but with like huge consequences for how we run society.
You got it. And one of the most famous examples is that Finnish UBI experiment they did.
Oh, yeah.
It ran for 2 years, and they gave 2,000 unemployed people a regular payment, no strings attached.
Interesting.
They wanted to see if it would make the Social Security system easier and encourage people to get jobs without being afraid of losing their benefits.
So did it work? Did people just like chill out, or did it actually help them find jobs?
Well, the results were kind of mixed.
Okay.
The studies say it didn't really make more people get jobs.
Ah.
But it did do some interesting things. People said they felt less stressed and anxious,
Mm.
and they used the time to do things like retraining, volunteering, or even taking care of family.
That's pretty cool because it means that UBI might not just be about finding a traditional job, but about giving people the space and security to help society in different ways. It kind of challenges the idea that everyone needs a 9 to 5 to be valuable.
Exactly. The Finnish experiment, even though it had mixed results, opens up this whole new way of thinking about work and what it means in our lives.
Mhm.
It kind of pushes us toward that idea of a post-work society that some of the research talks about.
A post-work society. That sounds amazing, but also kind of scary.
Yeah?
What would that even be like? Would we all just be hanging out by the pool all day?
Well, it's not really about everyone doing nothing, but more about changing what it means to be productive and contribute to society. It raises that question of if you didn't have to work for a living, what would you do with your time? What are you passionate about? What skills or talents could you share with the world?
That's a deep question.
Hmm.
It makes you wonder if a lot of the stress we feel comes from this pressure to always be working to fit into this really specific idea of success.
Totally. And the research says that UBI could be a way to explore different ways of living and working.
Mhm.
It could let people go after their creative dreams, invest in themselves, or help their communities in ways that aren't tied to a paycheck.
I like that. Okay, so Finland is one example, but what about other parts of the world?
Hmm.
I mean, Finland's a pretty small country that's not very diverse. How would UBI work in bigger, more complex societies?
That's a really good point. And the research does say that UBI isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. It talks about how hard it would be to set up UBI in different places.
Mm.
Like China, for example, has this whole hukou system, which links social benefits to where you live.
So trying to make a truly universal program there could get really messy, especially with the big differences between cities and rural areas.
Yeah, it's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
And it shows that we have to think about the specific social, economic, and political situations of each country when we're talking about UBI. You can't just take one model and expect it to work everywhere.
It's more like tailoring the idea to fit each place, right?
Right.
Like making a custom suit.
Now, changing gears a bit, one of the biggest questions about UBI is obviously the money question. How do you pay for something this ambitious?
Yeah.
And the research doesn't shy away from that at all. It looks at a whole bunch of ways to fund UBI, each with its own good and bad points.
Yeah, I remember feeling kind of overwhelmed by that part. It was like a crash course in public finance. But it was also good that they didn't just skip over the hard stuff. Well, understanding the financial side is really important because it shows us the choices we have to make as a society. It's not just about finding the money. It's about deciding what's important to us, what values we want to have in our economic systems.
So let's break down some of those funding options. What were some of the most interesting ideas from the research?
One that really stuck with me was taxing AGI capital. The idea is that if AGI is making money, some of that money should go back to the people whose jobs are being taken over by automation.
Hmm.
It's almost like a robot tax, but instead of punishing companies for automating, you're taking some of the profits that automation creates.
It's like recognizing that AI is becoming a new kind of capital, and it should be taxed, just like other kinds of capital.
Yeah.
It's a cool way to address the wealth gap that AI might make worse.
Right. And the research also looks at other progressive ideas like land value taxes, closing tax loopholes, and social dividends from stuff that the public owns. These ideas are popular with people who think wealth should be shared more fairly.
Right. I remember there were some more controversial ideas too, right? Like deficit financing, basically borrowing money to pay for UBI. That sounds kind of risky, especially if it's not done carefully.
You're right. Deficit financing usually makes economists nervous because it could be hard to sustain in the long term. But the research presents it as one possibility among many, making us think about the potential benefits and the risks.
So finding the right way to pay for UBI is a balancing act.
Yeah.
You want it to be sustainable, but also fair, so that it doesn't put too much burden on any one group of people.
Absolutely. And that's where the research really makes you think. It doesn't give you easy answers, but a way to figure out different approaches and decide what matches your own values.
It's not about blindly accepting one solution, but have a thoughtful discussion about how we want to fund and implement UBI.
Now, one last thing I want to mention from the research is the potential of DeFi, decentralized finance, as a new way to fund UBI.
DeFi, that whole world of blockchain and crypto. It's a little confusing, I have to admit.
Yeah, it can be a lot to take in. Think of it this way. DeFi protocols can make passive income like interest on a savings account, but using cryptocurrencies and smart contracts.
Okay.
Imagine a group of people owning a solar farm together, and the profits are automatically split between them. That's kind of how some DeFi protocols work.
Interesting. So instead of relying on the government or taxes, DeFi could be a more decentralized, maybe even fairer way to make money that could then be used for UBI.
That's the idea, and the research suggests that DeFi could be important in making a fairer financial system, maybe even providing a way to fund UBI outside the usual power structures.
So it's not just about the future of work, but the future of finance too. It's like we're uncovering more and more complexity with every topic we explore.
Yeah, it's a lot to absorb, but that's what makes this whole thing so interesting. We're
So
not just looking at the future, we're exploring all the possibilities and challenges that come with AI changing our world.
You know, it's wild to think about how UBI could change like our whole relationship with work.
Mhm.
But it feels like there's this other side to this conversation that we haven't really talked about yet. It's not just the practical stuff and the money. It's about what it means to be human in a world where work might not be the most important thing anymore.
Yeah, that's where this gets really interesting. The research goes beyond just like the mechanics of UBI
Mm.
and looks at the bigger picture, like the philosophical and social stuff, you know what I mean? It makes us ask these big questions about what work is, about what gives us purpose, how we see ourselves as people and as a whole society.
Yeah, it's like we're about to go through this massive change. And UBI is like the thing that's making it happen. We're having to rethink some of our most basic ideas about how the world works.
Right. And what's so cool is that the research shows us all these different viewpoints. Like some people think UBI would be amazing. Like it would bring this new era of freedom and creativity.
Mhm.
People could follow their passions, explore their talents, and contribute to society in ways that aren't limited by having a job.
It's like that saying, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. But what about the other side? Some people are worried that UBI would make people lazy and not want to work.
Yeah, that's a valid point. We can't ignore that. But I think we got to remember that work isn't just about getting paid. It's also about having a purpose doing something that matters, connecting with other people. And those needs don't disappear just because we have a basic income.
You're right. It's like we need to come up with a new definition of work in this context. Maybe it's less about clocking in and out and more about doing stuff that's meaningful to us, whether it's making art, starting a business, volunteering, helping out in our communities, or even just taking care of our families.
Exactly. And the research even makes some interesting comparisons to stuff that's happened in the past. They talk about the cura annone in ancient Rome, where people got a grain dole, and the surprisingly good social welfare system in China, like centuries ago. These examples show us that the idea of helping those in need isn't new. It's been around for a long time.
Wow. It's like we're seeing these old ideas coming back in a modern way with AI and automation as the driving forces.
It makes you think.
Yeah. It makes you wonder if we're like naturally programmed to care for each other, to make sure everyone has a basic level of safety and well-being.
It's a good question, and one that we could spend a lot of time thinking about. But we can't forget that UBI by itself isn't the ultimate solution. The research makes it clear that we need other things to happen too to make this transition to a post-work future work smoothly.
What kind of things are we talking about here? What else has to be in place to support this change in how we live and work?
They emphasize stuff like good retraining and upskilling programs to help people adapt to the new jobs that are out there.
Hmm.
As AI takes over certain tasks, we got to make sure people have the skills they need to succeed in new roles.
Yeah, it's like we're not just giving people a safety net, but also a springboard to jump into new opportunities.
Exactly. Another important thing is access to mental health services. Losing a job and all this societal change can be really stressful, so it's important to have support and resources to help people deal with it.
Right. It's about understanding that this change won't be easy for everyone and that mental and emotional health are just as important as being financially secure.
Absolutely. And finally, the research really stresses how important it is to build strong communities and social connections. As traditional workplaces change or even disappear, we need to find new ways to connect with each other, build relationships, and feel like we belong.
Yeah, it's like we're rethinking the whole structure of society, how we connect with each other, how we find meaning and purpose, how we contribute to the greater good. It's scary, but also really exciting.
It is, and that's why this whole deep dive is so important. We're not just talking about UBI as a policy, but as a way to start a bigger conversation about the kind of future we want. A future that's fair, sustainable, and ultimately fulfilling for everyone.
So as we wrap up this exploration of UBI and the future of work, what's the main takeaway for our listeners? What do we hope they'll remember?
The research encourages everyone to really think critically, question assumptions, and consider different perspectives. There's no single right answer when it comes to UBI, but hopefully this conversation has given you the knowledge and understanding to form your own opinions and have meaningful discussions about the future we're building.
And hey, if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity or got you thinking about the possibilities, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to 15-Minute Discourse for more insightful explorations of the topics that matter.
Right, we're here to help you navigate this crazy world and empower you to create the future you want.
Thanks for joining us on this thought-provoking journey.
Yeah, until next time, keep those minds curious and those conversations flowing.
And remember, the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we create together.